two together, and it does seem to add up to 4 as far as a cell having been organized here in Boston, laying the groundwork for what seems to have all the earmarks of the sort of thing someone like Osama bin Laden could have put together.
Well, I appreciate your clarifying that for us, Bill, because what you've just reported is extremely disturbing, and I can imagine, based on what you're reporting and what the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald is reporting, you are going to be, I think, in the crossfire of where most of the major new developments are coming from. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you. And now we're going to go back to Leon in Atlanta.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, as you know, throughout the morning, we've been checking reaction from around the world. We want to show you this picture that we're getting in right now from London. You're looking now at the Prime Minister's residence there in London, number 10 Downing Street, the residence of Tony Blair. And as you can see there, the British flag there is flying at half-staff, a symbol that, once again, that country is walking shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. and sharing their grief and offering their condolences at this time. We're also seeing a similar scene at the U.S. Capitol. You see there on the top of the Capitol building there, all the flags there as well, flying this morning, half-staff, while that joint session is underway right now in Congress. Let's stay in Washington while we have that picture up and check in with our Kelly Wallace, who is standing by at the White House, where, as we understand, President Bush is involved in some meetings right now with his cabinet and security officials. Kelly.
Absolutely, Leon. The president meeting with his national security team. That includes Secretary of State Colin Powell, his national security advisor, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, CIA Director George Tenet, as well as others. That meeting began at 9:30. It's expected to end just moments from now, at which point we will hear from President Bush. It will be the first time we are hearing from him since last night when he went before the nation. This to be the president's getting his up-to-date briefing on the latest on the investigation, as well as the search and rescue efforts. Two goals really for the administration, Leon, today. One, to show that the U.S. government is doing everything it can to help with recovery efforts in New York, in Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon, and that investigative teams are deployed to places like Boston and San Francisco and L.A., again, to do everything possible to find those responsible. Ari Fleischer, White House press secretary, talking to reporters a short time ago, not commenting, as U.S. officials have not been doing so far publicly, about this investigation, just saying that the full resources of the U.S. government involved here. We did get, though, Leon, a little bit more about the president's involvement. He was in the Oval Office at 7:05 this morning, and he reached out to a couple of world leaders, calling Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Ari Fleischer saying those leaders expressed the resolve to stand united against terrorism. And interestingly, I think we're just about to hear from President Bush now, Leon, so let's go to that if that is about underway. Oh, okay. Sorry, misinformation. Anyway, Leon, back to you. I know the president also calling yesterday his father, former President George W. Bush, aboard Air Force One, an interesting conversation, and also reaching out to Solicitor General Ted Olson, who, as we've reported, lost his wife in one of those crashes yesterday. Leon, back to you. Terrible situation there, and we understand that his wife was able to make a cell phone call from that plane as well. Thanks, Kelly. We'll get back to you once we do hear word from Mr. Bush. Darren, over to you now.
Meanwhile, a lot of people wanting information about how this investigation would take place, how government authorities will get to the bottom of who carried out these attacks. Let's bring in James Woolsey, former CIA director from 93 to 95, also a former ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, good morning, and thanks for joining us here.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Any clues you're hearing as more information becomes available, that it's giving you an indication as to who might be responsible for these attacks?
Well, of course, there's a lot of information that points toward bin Laden's group, and that's understandable. Bin Laden has been advertising himself now for some time, issuing fatwas, religious declaratives, condemnations, making videotapes, quoting poems, having his subordinates all talk about how they're going to be carrying out major terrorist operations against the U.S. So it may well be the case that bin Laden's group was instrumental in this and, in fact, carried it out. But one wants to be careful using the word behind it, because there is at least some possibility that someone else was behind it. This was a very complex operation, and the possibility that there was a state sponsor behind or working with bin Laden, such as possibly Iraq, I think has to be investigated. There's a book out late last year by Laurie Milroy called Saddam's Study of Revenge, about the possibility that Saddam was behind the 1973 World Trade Center bombing, and that Ramzi Yousef, who was the mastermind of that, was involved with Iraqi intelligence. That information has been poo-pooed to some extent by the Clinton administration.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to have you hold on 1 second. We want to go live now to the White House. President Bush speaking with members of the cabinet. Let's listen in.
Intelligence updates. The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. This is an enemy that thinks its harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win. The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens. But we will not allow this enemy to win the war by changing our way of life or restricting our freedoms. This morning I am sending to Congress a request for emergency funding authority so that we are prepared to spend whatever it takes to rescue victims, to help the citizens of New York City and Washington, D.C. respond to this tragedy, and to protect our national security. I want to thank the members of Congress for their unity and support. America is united. The freedom-loving nations of the world stand by our side. This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil, but good will prevail. Thank you very much.
Seeking a formal declaration.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Live,
please.
please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. We'll take on. Live, please. Thanks.
It doesn't appear as if President Bush is going to take any questions from reporters in the room. He is meeting at the White House with members of the cabinet. We just listened to him live, the first time the country's heard him speak since he addressed the nation last night. The president saying that the events of yesterday were more than terrorism. It was an act of war, an attack on freedom and democracy. Also saying that America now faces a different enemy than ever before. Let's bring back in former CIA Director James Woolsey. Mr. Ambassador, I understand you were listening right along with us to the president.
Yes.
When the president says this is a different enemy than ever before, what does he mean by that?
Well, he's talking about terrorists, and particularly, I think, a group like bin Laden's, and I thought the president's address was eloquent and stirring even, but he used a word, harbor, which he used last night. A harbor for terrorists might be, say, the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, but there may be more involved than harbors here. There may be a government other than a harbor, such as the Iraqi government, that is orchestrating this to some extent, funding it, working closely on it behind bin Laden or some other terrorist group. And I very much hope that the Bush administration, unlike the Clinton administration, will not set aside this possibility and assume that everything is just a terrorist group, even a terrorist group as major as bin Laden's. It really needs to look carefully at the possibility that there may be state sponsorship here, and I think the most likely, certainly not the only possibility, is Iraq.
So to look outside the box, in other words, the terrorists might be geographically in one place, but the funding might be coming from someplace very different.
Possible funding, possible direction, possible support in the form of intelligence organization assistance to the terrorists. There are all sorts of possibilities. This was the original theory of the chief FBI investigator, Mr. Fox, of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. But the government prosecutors turned away from it a couple of years later, and the Clinton administration turned away from it, turned toward the theory that this was all just loose associations of terrorists and then later bin Laden. I think, I hope, the Bush administration will go back and take a fresh look and consider at least the possibility that there could be some state sponsor involvement here.
James Woolsey, Mr. Ambassador, former CIA director. Sir, thanks for your time this morning, and thanks for your insight as well.
Thank you.
Leon.
Well, the investigations into what happened here and who's responsible are well underway, and we understand that we're just being told now that the FBI is going to be having two different press conferences, one at Boston Logan Airport and another one at Shakesville, Pennsylvania, which is the site of that one plane crash, excuse me, just south of Pittsburgh. And once those do get underway, we'll check them out. But in the meantime, let's go now to our Washington Bureau, where Kelly Arena, our justice correspondent, is standing by. Kelly?
Well, Leon, there are many threads that are being pulled together here to try to get at exactly who did this. And I'll start with the fact that intelligence sources tell CNN that at least 2 phone calls were intercepted by the United States after the bombing. Now, they believe that the conversations were between members of the group, the Al-Qaeda organization, which is backed by Osama bin Laden. During those conversations, there was talk of hitting 2 U.S. targets. This is one of the pieces of evidence that points to Osama bin Laden. Points to, doesn't prove anything, but that is part of the investigation. The second thing is that we did hear from the Justice Department earlier that it is a good guess that there were between 3 and 5 hijackers on each of the planes, and at least one of the hijackers must have been trained professionally to fly commercial aircraft. We do know that law enforcement sources tell us that part of the investigation involves looking into checking the flight manifest, the passenger lists, and cross-checking those with names that have attended flight school to see if there's any correlation between the two. They're also looking at facilities that offer simulation training, flight simulation training, to see if there's anything that matches there, because they say that to fly state-of-the-art equipment like we have on our commercial aircraft, you had to be trained either in the United States or in Europe, and so they are busy doing that. We do know that the investigation we heard earlier has intensified in 2 areas. In Boston, where there was a car that was impounded by law enforcement with, we are told, suspicious materials, but also in southern Florida, where law enforcement sources confirmed that there were several search warrants that were attempted to be delivered this morning. There was some information on flight manifests as well that pointed to possible links with Osama bin Laden sympathizers in South Florida, but unfortunately none of those search warrants were able to yield anything. I was told the quote is, it's pure vanilla so far, meaning there's no solid investigative leads, but investigations are intense in both Boston and South Florida, Leon.
All right, great. Thanks much. Kelly Arena in Washington. Now, let's go up to New York. Paula.
All right, thanks so much. I don't have a whole lot to report here right now, Leon, except to say that there is still some hope that 2 men trapped in the rubble of the World Trade Center are expected to be rescued. If you add that to the 9 that have already been rescued, that including 6 firefighters and 3 police officers, your total would come to 11. Now, the mayor of this city held a news conference a short while ago, where he expressed his goal to try to get as much rubble out of the area, and of course the first priority to see if there are any more victims trapped alive in this rubble. Now, the city is still at somewhat of a standstill today. The major stock markets are closed, public schools, private schools are closed. All businesses south of 14th Street, which is 20 or blocks away from here, are closed. Several inbound bridges and tunnels remain closed at this hour. You look at these pictures of the rubble, and it's stunning to think that